Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about the passing of Rush Limbaugh. Many of you may have known he was a political commentator. He was a TV show host. He had a radio show as well. And some may have seen him as maybe a little bit controversial, but he had very conservative views. His Mercury is in Capricorn, so that's no shocker there. The fact that it's an interesting combination having the Sun in Capricorn and Aquarius ascendant. Signs are adjacent, but these two energies are very. I mean, they could be diametrically opposed. You're talking about the Sun in Capricorn is very conservative and orthodox, of course, but with an Aquarius ascendant, of course, that could actually go. Aquarius is really the other way. It can be very unorthodox. And really, it's something where how I think this may have manifested with him is that maybe he had some utopian ideas or some unconventional, you know, type of ideas connected with his conservative beliefs, but that might have been non-conforming to some, but maybe anyway. We're going to talk about he passed away due to lung cancer, and we're going to be talking about some natal placements and transits in this chart that may have contributed to this astrologically. Now, thing is, as far as natally, now he does one thing that I've noticed. I mean, you look at the as far as his eighth house, his eighth house on his eighth house cusp is Virgo. That ruler Mercury is conjunct the 12th house cusp, and Mercury, I mean, eighth house is the house of death. He has the ruler in Mercury, which can be connected with the lungs, conjunct the 12th house cusp of restrictions and hospitalization, and Mercury is also retrograde. And it's also in Capricorn, the sign connected with restrictions and limitations in his eighth house. He has Saturn and Neptune. Saturn can indicate some difficulties or some chronic illness, and it's an eighth house of death. And he also have Neptune can be connected with diseases, and that is in his eighth house. And the thing too is in his chart as well, he also has Jupiter in Pisces in the first house. Jupiter can be connected with Cancer. Pisces is the sign of incurable diseases or ones that can't be eradicated. I don't know if there has been any cure for lung cancer, but obviously in this case it couldn't have been eradicated. Another thing too that stood out to me looking in his chart natally, okay, he does have the ruler of that sixth house, Moon. He has the zodiac sign Cancer on the cusp of the sixth house, with the ruler of it, the Moon, is conjunct the North Node. So it's really, it's not really, surprising that this was, the Moon is the public. The health issue is something. You're talking about the North Node. And then the ruler of the sixth house, there was something, it could give some more significance in connection with a health-related issue. At some point would really need to be addressed and confronted. The fact that the moon is in Pisces, Pisces is the sign, again, connected with incurable diseases and ones that can't be eradicated. Also had transit Neptune not far from that North Node at this time, and Neptune is about diseases, and again, Pisces, ones that can't be eradicated. When you have transits that involve the North Node, it often can reflect in issues that one may have to confront and address. Another thing too is that transit Sun was not far from his natal Jupiter. Now, it's not a conjunction by any means based on the orbs we use for transits, but we don't know if I don't think we could say definitively that if something is like 7 degrees or so from in a transit from one planet to another, that it doesn't feel vibration. The sun is about life And Jupiter, again, can be connected with Cancer. Uh, Another thing, too, is that this is a time, looking at this chart, transit, the thing about what I'm noticing in this chart as well is that, okay, the natal chart, I was talking before about the ruler of the 8th house, Mercury, being conjunct the 12th house cusp. He also has the ruler of the 12th house of hospitalization being in the 8th house. Now, I'm not 100% sure he died in a hospital, but I'm sure he likely had been hospitalized at least near the time of his death. And also another thing too, I'm noticing the sun in the 12th house can give certain weakness, like with energy and vitality. I don't know if he had any like strong being in Capricorn. I don't know if he had any strong Capricorn health related issues, but the sun could be connected with the physical body and life. It wouldn't surprise me that if he had some issues with the knees, the bones, the joints, the hamstrings, um, the skin, the teeth. And transit Pluto was not far from his natal sun at the time of his passing, and of course Pluto is associated with death. The sun is about life. Pluto can obliterate and destroy things that it contacts, and sadly in this case it might have played a role in the destruction, obliteration of life in this case. Now another thing, looking at his chart as well, I noticed he has a cardinal T-square that involves Mercury in Capricorn, Uranus in Cancer in the 6th house of health, and also in Saturn in Libra in the 8th house of death. These planets, again, Uranus in the 6th house of health, Saturn in the 8th house of death, and Mercury fairly close proximity to the 12th house of endings. Now at this time, he had transit Chiron in Aries, was making a long opposition to Saturn in Libra. Now, I've said this in previous videos and I'll say it again, but for those that may not know, in many instances when you have a transit of a planet that makes an opposition to a focal point in a T-square configuration, significant events may occur, and perhaps in this case it was an exception because Chiron can be not just about emotional wounds, that could be about physical ones as well. May have been vitality issues. And the fact is, you are talking about being involved in this configuration, not just Chiron, Chiron, the transit planet that made the opposition to the focal point of the configuration, but in the configuration itself, Uranus, planet of unpredictability, in the 6th house of health. Saturn can be connected with chronic debilitations in the 8th house of death, and then Mercury, which of course can be associated with the lungs in Capricorn, the sign of restriction, retrograde as well. And the thing is, another thing that I'm looking at as far as transits go, okay, he does have transit Mercury in that 1st house of the physical body, and again, Mercury can be connected with the lungs. Also at this time, transit North Node in Gemini was making at least a loose inconjunct aspect to his natal sun in Capricorn. And inconjuncts in astrology can often be about health-related issues. Gemini can be associated with the lungs. The North Node can, again, be connected with issues one may have to address and confront, and it's making an inconjunct aspect to the sun, and the sun can be connected with life and the physical body. So those are some things I'm looking at as far as transits and natal placements that might have been tied in to his passing. Another thing though too Interestingly enough, the ruler of his first house of the physical body, the rulers, I should say, he has two, because with Aquarius rising, he has Saturn and Uranus as co-rulers. One of them, Uranus, again in the sixth house of health, and the other one, Saturn, is in the eighth house of death. And they were involved in that T square, a cardinal T square configuration. Um, this is an effect that he has Uranus making an opposition to Mercury. It can show, some perhaps some instability with Mercury-related issues, and which can be which and wouldn't exclude lungs. It tells me though that a lot of his communications may have been somewhat intermittent, and the kind of person that would speak to you. You might get some communication with him one moment, then he may go a period of time for not maybe talking to those people. It could be very sporadic and erratic communications. I have Mercury square my it squares my Uranus in my natal chart. And when people have Mercury in adverse aspect to Uranus in their natal chart, it can often be people that it can manifest in surprising and shocking people with what they say. And I would say with Rush Limbaugh that wouldn't shock anybody, because I'm sure he was somebody that would surprise people with sometimes, even though being very conservative, I'm sure he had some radical views on things, and surprise people with what he has said, or maybe the timing when he comes out when he says something. So anyway, people, those are some things to look at as far as some transits go and natal placements that may have been tied into his passing. Well, one other thing I did wanted to say as well, he also has the ruler of the third house in the first house of the physical body. Third house can corresponds with the zodiac sign Gemini in astrology. He has Aries on the cusp of his third house in his natal chart, and the third house can be connected with the lungs, and that ruler Mars is in the first house of the physical body. He also had transit Uranus and the moon in the third house at the time of his passing. Um, Uranus can give very erratic energy. Third house again is associated with the lungs. Um, Another thing is that he also had transit Mars in his fourth house at the time of his passing, and the fourth house can be connected with the end of life. Mars could be about physical related issues. So and the fact it appears to be in Taurus at the time of his passing, I'm sure it was something that was very persistent and stubborn, to say the absolute least. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.